to order. Thank you, Dan. Call it to order officially. And any issues with the agenda? Can I get a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, hit by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we've got an agenda. First up is the approval of minutes. We have these, I guess, separately on here, but we have the personnel minutes from January 11th, slightly different group, I guess. So Robin, Jim, and I, did you get a chance to review those minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay, and then Jim, Randy, and I will look at the minutes from the Finance Committee from February 8th. Any issues with those minutes?
Move approval.
Was that a second, Randy?
Yes, sorry.
No problem.
Trying to do too many things at one time.
There we go. Now I hear you.
I apologize.
All in favor of approving the minutes of February 8th indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay, that motion passes too. Now we'll go on to compensation connections and the presentation. And this is, I forget, is this kind of a preview of what we're going to share with the board the following meeting, right? The April meeting? I've lost track.
Well, and that's something that I think we should talk about. So I think the primary goal is to walk through so Shannon can take us through some of the slides that she sent out yesterday, focusing on maybe some of the differences and where our discussion points are. So everyone has seen versions of those slides. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't need to focus on, but essentially what Lynn and I need by the end of this meeting is some direction from the Finance Committee on what you want us to do in terms of putting a draft budget together for our April 12th meeting. And so, so Shannon can go through some of that to help tee up that conversation, but really what we need from you all, and there's a particular slide, I think it's one of the last slides, the next to the last slide maybe, that has kind of next steps and what we need from this committee, these committees for Lynn and I can get busy on working on the budget. But one open question I had is exactly how then this gets back to the full board. So actually that's on the agenda is what does this committee want to take back to the full board? What of this presentation is the full board going to be seeing? Is that something we want to try to do today? Or is that something that we do at the April meeting as, again, once Lynn and I have had a chance to put an initial budget together? So open to suggestions so.
Great. Thanks for the reframing, Jeff. And that's what we're going to get out of it. And we'll start with the presentation and pass the conch over to you, Shannon.
Sounds good. I'm just can someone enable screen sharing so I can share the slides? I know, as Jeff just mentioned, everyone's kind of seen a version of these already. We had a chance to kind of talk them through, ask some questions, but I thought I'd just run through them just in case there's anything on the slides you want to discuss as a group in that context, and then keep moving forward with the information.
You should be able to share.
Awesome. Let me get that. Let's share this one. Okay. Can everyone see?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. And I'm just moving you around on my screen. Sorry, one moment, please. While I do that. Okay. I'll come down here. All right, so this is just a recap of the market data sources that we used in the study. So I will just pause, since there's nothing new on this slide, but I want to pause and just see if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
Well,
okay.
I guess I got thoughts on it. One of the things that I talked about is when I'm looking at this and looking at the comparables, nobody's taken into consideration on the comparables that it's not just Thurston County, that this organization represents a lot more. I do quite a bit of the contract negotiation, the leads on that, and I go through this all the time and have for many years. And We've done a dozen of them this year. But when it comes to comparables, our organizations are not just Thurston County and or the bigger, larger economic areas. So I just wanted to make that point, and whatever you put in is what you get out.
Thanks, Randy. And yeah, and I know we talked about that. Was that just last week that we met?
Yes.
You know, and when we selected Thurston County in particular, we were thinking about it as the most likely place that talent might come from. So acknowledge everything Randy said, and our thinking around it was what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make some frame at some point. It seems like a reasonable one, but it is incomplete, as Randy said. I agree.
Okay. All right. And then just summarizing kind of the state of the market data. When we did our job matching, you know, again, focusing on content and qualifications, not just job title. We had an average of over 5 matches per ORCAA job, kind of bringing all the data right now, effective July 1, 2023. And we did research 3 different percentiles just to see how does ORCAA compare to those, which I will pull up right now. So this is current state of versus market. So thinking about ORCAA's pay range midpoint. So this is kind of the value of the job, if you will, comparing value of job to value of job. So we've got, you know, ORCAA compared to the 25th percentile, it's about 8% above the market, 50th percentile, just a little below the market, below the 50th percentile. And then at the 75th percentile, 10% below. So ORCAA right now, just current state, the way it is, aligns most closely to the 50th percentile of the market when we think about the value of the jobs. And we'll talk about where are the people. So we'll talk about that later, but this is just thinking about it job to job, if you will. Okay. So one of the questions that came up, just to like get clarity on this when we met with Randy, was which are the jobs that just based on the market data would recommend changing ranges. So these are the 5 jobs where just based on the market data, it's like, okay, we need to move these up, if you will, into a different range that's more reflective of the competitive market. And I know we've talked around these jobs, but I think this is the first time the whole group's seeing the list.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad that you added that.
Yeah, I think Randy suggested it. So thank you, Randy.
So does that mean that they're more than generally more or about the 4% under the 50% median?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
They're all about 5%
Okay.
or more.
Or
Actually,
more.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
more. Yeah.
I would probably qualify that at the top of the list if we take this to the board.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay. So, of course, as part of this and looking at the market data as a whole, you know, we are suggesting some revisions, updates to the whole structure. So the salary range structure itself. So we talked about as a group, you know, eliminating that range 21 and starting at range 22. So that's a recommendation. We've talked about having going to 11 steps instead of 9. So adding 2 more steps. And then, you know, maintaining 3% between steps. So that's not new. And anchoring at the 50th percentile of the market. So making sure that it would be, you know, step E in the 9-step piece would align with the new market data. So that means tweaking the dollars in this overall by about 1.5%, I think it is on average. So this is one recommendation for the group to think about. So Kathy and I put this together. We hope this is helpful and not like confuses everybody. But this is based on the conversation that we had with Randy. And it's like, well, if we did just what we've talked about right now, like those 5 jobs, getting them in the ranges where we want to be, looking at the proposed structure that we just showed, eliminating that grade 21. So those 2 jobs and people would move to range 22. Now what? Right? Like how does ORCAA then compare without any other changes? And so, you know, in terms of the 25th and the 75th percentile, that stays about the same. And the 50th percentile, then ORCAA would move to be on market compared to the 50th percentile. So just making those changes kind of helps bump ORCAA up, if you will, to be more fully settled at the 50th percentile.
I can for 1 second. From our conversation, I just want to clarify that just by eliminating the range 21, that put us up to the 50th percentile. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
My point that I had made at the time, though, is, you know, somebody does this all the time. You also have to look at 2 things. First of all, I'm not wedded to 50%. That's never a good thing to have as policy. It's something to shoot for internally for our discussions. But when you start doing this policy, it comes back to bite you later on in different ways. But the idea that we are always going to have positions that we have the possibility of losing because the market is hot for them or the numbers are just too far off. So I asked them to go back and to look at those. One of them in particular, and she's on here, so she knows I discussed this. I can tell you in all of our markets, to me, the market needs to be at a minimum of 30 minutes all the way around us or all the way around the facilities. And that's going to incorporate part of Mason County, part of Grace Harbor and the like. But I can tell you right now, financial people you can't get them. And literally in Mason County, how I handled that is we created a compensation strategy for education. And if you have a CPA, we actually, in order to start to create a bench, we are giving people that have a CPA certifications literally 10 grand every year. And it's broke out throughout the year. That's how you can retain. But if I didn't have some honor and integrity, I'd have tried everything to steal our finance person. So I would not, for this organization. So I would not expect that or think any different that some other organization would take her or take the position, the person in the position. I'm sorry. I never mean to.
Don't use names, right? Yeah.
So with that, I asked them to look at what that would look like and where they're at so we can put those numbers together. But I just wanted to make clear that just by eliminating range 21, that put us in the 50th percentile if that was our general desire. But the other should put us, further into those numbers. But at the time, we only looked at, I think, 3. Now we have 5. So I'd like to know what those are when we get to that point.
Mhm.
The differences.
I really appreciate that, Randy. I think that's my challenge in my day job too, is like you really need to be in the 75th for some jobs and we're being a niche kind of specialty organization, we don't have quite as much competition for our line kind of staff, but the more common positions that other organizations have are important for us to really look at. So I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Other comments, or shall I go to the next slide? Okay. So far we've been talking about jobs, and now we're going to start to talk a little bit about people. So this next slide, this is the same pie chart we've been looking at in terms of the form of it. So now we're comparing current, so employee current pay to the proposed ranges that we had up a couple of slides ago. And so we've got, right now we've got 3 people who are below the proposed pay range minimum. So we'd want to adjust those up. So those are the 3 people that were below range minimum versus the 5 jobs that are off market. that need, that we are recommending making an adjustment. And there is some overlap between the 3 people and the 5 jobs, but that's where the 3 and the 5 come from. So we got 3 that are below the range minimum in the orange wedge, another 3 that are in the first quintile, so the lower in the range. We don't have anybody in the second quintile. It's just the way it worked out. So there are another 3 that are around the middle of the range, and then 2 that are kind of that 4th quintile, so approaching near the top, and then 5. There's a lot of long serving staff at ORCAA, and so there's 5 people who are near the top of the proposed range, and no one's above the range, so everyone's within the proposed ranges. Sorry, no one's above. We've got the 3 that are below. Okay. So, we've talked about this as a group before. There's some, some implementation options or things to think about, right? And we'll cover this also as well when we kind of look at the next steps from a decision-making standpoint. So some options for implementation. One is just to, focus on moving everybody who's below step A, getting them onto step A. In addition to doing the other proposed structure changes that we talked about. And then that other option is kind of getting everybody onto the next higher step. And so you may recall then, if we make some changes to the pay range structure, then we end up with folks who are kind of standing between steps. And so this is kind of getting them onto a step. No one goes backwards, so it would be the next highest step, the step closest to their pay that's above their current pay. And so we just sort of broke out some costing here just to think about it. So the 50th percentile column, that's just if we do some of the proposed changes that we've been talking about. And with that, the next column we've got, eliminating grade 21. What are the costs related to that piece of work? And then just so that everyone can see it, Kathy did some calculations and basically was like, all right, well, what if ORCAA wants to apply a 4% salary adjustment, kind of across the board? So what are some of the costs related to that? So these are kind of high level numbers for us to think about when we explore sort of the options. Obviously, Lynn, when she's working on actual budgeting, that's going to be dialed in, depending on what this group recommends. Okay. So a new chart that we put together is, well, all right, well, if we did these different things, what does employee pay look like versus market? And again, this is sort of the average of employee pay. We've got some folks, as we know from the pie chart, that are kind of lower in the range, some people that are higher in the range. So just thinking about this overall. So current pay is on average actually right at market. So at the 50th percentile on average. If we move those 5 jobs and eliminate range 21, then ORCAA employee pay would be just a hair over market, if you will. Still really at market, 101%. Same with bring to step A. So because that includes moving the 5 jobs and eliminating range 21, because it's all part of kind of a bundle there, then it's about the same, 101% of market. And then moving everybody into that next higher step, that'd be 102% of market. So you can kind of see still kind of where ORCAA is on average right now, and making these changes. These are kind of, the dollars are not insignificant, and it's sort of incremental change. to employee pay. So this is new information, so I just want to pause, give you all a chance to digest. Okay. Okay.
I guess I had one question.
Oh,
I
go
mean,
back.
what's the? Can you just describe a little bit more the difference between bringing everyone to step A and moving just the 5 jobs and eliminating the first step? I'm just the nuance between those and how they're the same. The same consequence is a little hard for me to grok.
You bet. I don't know, Kathy, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So it's actually because it's the same people that we moved 5 jobs and eliminating 21. It's about moving people to within the range. So that's that cost in that column there. It's the same cost in the next column because it's the same people. Now, if we had 1 other person or 2 other people that were outside the ranges that weren't affected by the 5 jobs and the 21, then it would be a different number. But because it's really the same people that's affected by kind of both of those decisions, it's the same number.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. This chart is the same, no changes to this one. This is illustrating if ORCAA chose to go with the implementation option of the next highest step, where people would fall in the ranges. So the green shading indicates a person or people. Sometimes we have multiple people on the same step, but that's where the people are. So this is kind of where people would end up if implementing that next highest step option. So getting everybody on a step. Okay. All right. Am I okay to go to the next slide? I want to make sure. Okay. Okay. All right. So thinking about, as Jeff mentioned, thinking about next steps. So,
Sorry, can I ask you a quick question?
oh yeah.
What, do we have a position that's in that bottom range, the 32, or how?
Not at this time.
Okay, so it's a placeholder, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was just
Yeah.
curious. I was surprised not to see any green lines there.
Yep, I think that was set, if I remember right, because the agency has had a placeholder for a deputy director, and I think that was the range for the deputy director. I don't think, as far as I know, the agency has never actually had a deputy director, but yeah, so.
That's perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, great question. Okay, so thinking about next steps then, so some options. So, you know, the personnel committee has talked about eliminating range 21 in support of, you know, living wage. So that's something that's been discussed. The personnel committee has also talked about, you know, using the 50th percentile as an anchor point, if that's something that it wants to do. So comparing to the 50th percentile. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's paid at the 50th percentile, right? Because everyone's experience contributes to where they are in the pay range. Some people would be low, some people would be high. Okay, and then also the personnel committees kind of wrestled with, you know, moving folks just to step A, implementing the other changes, or going all the way into, you know, implementing the next higher step. And last time the committee met, they were leaning toward next higher step as an option. And then I think something that came up in the conversation with Randy last week is, you know, another option is to really just consider immediate action to address market shortfalls. So like those 5 people, Randy, is kind of what you were thinking about, I believe, when you said that. I don't want to put words in your mouth there. You know, so kind of chewing people up right away, potentially.
So
Yeah.
can I just ask, would that be like everything except the 4% that was on the chart now, and then
Oh, yeah.
consider cost, then consider adjustments with the budget? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, if you don't mind, when we're ready to do it, I actually have I'm writing it out on the way to propose it to you for consideration. It'd be easier probably to do it all at one time because it's different everything, it's like a balloon in air. You can't move one without moving the other, or if you move one, it's going to affect all the others. So I actually have a proposal I put forward to you that would include some of that. Yes.
Okay, great. Then I'll just recap this slide while you continue to do that. And so then to Jeff's earlier point, you know, the hope is that these committees can provide some direction to Lynn and to Jeff in terms of budget planning, so they can be teed up and ready to go. Okay. That's the actual presentation.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
To go ahead.
All
then?
right. Yeah, do you want to share your screen, Randy, or?
No, there's no need to share my screen. I don't have it like that. I've been writing it down as we're talking. And
All right.
Randy, one question before you go. Do we want to hear some of Lynn and Jeff's thinking about the implementation possibilities in this before you move into a recommendation, or do you want to do that first?
yeah, well, you can, but the recommendations is implementation. The stuff that on the things that I see. It also includes some of the things I worry about. So
Okay.
it'd be
Let's give
discussed.
Randy the floor, and then we'll hear from Jeff and Lynn and see what they think about his suggestion. We can.
Okay, so first I want to put off that I'm going to make some comments on some of the issues that are being discussed here on where I stand with it, but it's still, you're going to find that in my recommendation, I even myself do away with some of my worries or considerations. So I'll be making recommendations that are opposite of what I'm about to say. One of the problems I have with this is, again, it's in my opinion, our market analysis is inflated because of where we selected to do our market analysis. There should be a minimum of a 30 mile or 30-minute range for being able to bring people in my opinion. And just because something is in Thurston County doesn't mean it has to stay there. There's a lot of different options that go with that. But because of that, I think the numbers would be inflated. But even with that, I'm not prepared to try and beat any of them up or drag them down. That's not, I'm just telling you that whatever we put forward, in my opinion, is going to be even better than it should be. So one of the things I wanted to throw out there is there was a concept of eliminating a process, eliminating step one because of the concept of living wage. I don't believe in that. That's subjective. You're going to put whatever verbiage you want in, and if it's already inflated, that living wage concept comes down to what you want: 3 phones or 5 phones? What do we consider living wage? 3 cars in the family, cable TV, internet. It all becomes subjective, especially for the area you're in. But with
Just
that,
so you know, I use the MIT living wage calculator for that.
well, again, though, it's
Yeah.
still even that to me. I'm not a fan. I don't believe in. Because what is a living wage? I got people out here in Mason County that drag trees, and when they bring Christmas presents home to their family and they're paying for everything that they need to, it's a living wage out here. And some of my people here consider that an insult when it's said. So we all have our different ways of looking at it. But with that being said, there's another reason for eliminating the 21st grade, and that is because it actually brings us up to where we would hope to be. Because again, I don't believe in putting it in policy. You will pay a price if you do, putting things at 50 percentiles in policy. But I like to be there as a working thought for myself. With that, we actually accomplish that just like that by doing away with that one lower level and bringing the ones that they have already found to be below what their comparables would be, which is the reason for doing things. So I think that should go away for that purpose. That happens to bring us to the 50th percentile with that alone. There's different ways of looking at how some of these things could be done. Multi-level ways of implementations, for example. I myself, I have no issue with changing budgets in order to at least capture the highest and greatest risks of losing people, but only when it was actually the calculations showed that they're underpaid that much. Then sometimes having a spot adjustment that quickly is beneficial for everybody. It just is. It's beneficial for giving people hope that theirs will be looked at in the next couple of years and they may move up. But at the same time, it also helps to solidify that we understand that this market has shifted this much in these last few years. We have to do a spot adjustment, and that's outside of what they should get yearly, because we decide things that should be done yearly. I think this is a separate issue. So you don't have to, in my opinion, wait until the next year. But if you were to implement that way, it can be done at two levels, the highest and greatest risk taken care of immediately in the budget, where the other ones are covered are immediately in this year's budget. The others, half of them are covered in next year's budget, like the 21s if we do away with that grade this next year. So it can be done, it can be split into two different ones. But I want you to understand and remember that no matter what we do, if we split these things and we get it to the 50th percentile and we get them to where we're at, we could be there without an increase. Now, Mason County literally did 1.75 for some of their employees, the union up to 2.25, where we here at ORCAA went well over that, as we discussed before. My point I'm going to make is we do some of these spot adjustments into the budget. We make the adjustments where we're exactly where we should be, but we still going to need to calculate giving some type of raise, because if you don't give some type of raise, you're going to have animosity and anger and stuff build up. So that doesn't, I never believe in doing nothing. So it would make sense, whatever we do, to build in a raise, even if we adjust and got everybody where they needed to be, to build in a raise level of 2% into the budget. So I think you should do split. I think you should do 2%, and that should also put them well above the 50th percentile, because they'll be at the 50th percentile with the elimination of range 21. They'll be above the 50th percentile with the adjustment of the jobs, and then you add another 2% on top of that, and they are well above it. And I think that that is an exceptional way to treat your employees and do well.
Go ahead, Robin. Thank you, Randy.
Do we have costing for that? I'm assuming not, since Randy just said it, but.
Well, it was
it would be-
97,000 for 4%, and he just cut that in half. That's the only change I heard. So
Yeah, so roughly half.
just other
of
than
the
it
cost
just
of the 4%.
he stepped it
Yeah.
into two phases.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that we had talked about previously was having an understanding of the impact to ORCAA's budget of taking any of these steps. Like, what can we actually afford? And I don't know if Lynn has had a chance to put that together yet.
Lynn, no.
No, I mean, again, we've been waiting to hear, I mean, all we've got at this point is essentially the information that's on slide 9 in terms of the costs of some of these things to kind of ballpark it. But we're waiting, just because there's so many different variables, it didn't make sense for Lynn to start doing a bunch of numbers until we had more sense of where these committees were going to land. But that's, again, why we need some clear direction today, so that Lynn can go forth and put those costs together. Because yeah, I mean, as she and I have been talking about, whatever these committees, whatever is decided today, we're going to have to figure out how does the revenue support it. And there's only certain ways that we bring in revenue, right? It's fees for our permits, it's assessments. So that's something that we'll have to look at, is how do we cover any of this with a concurrent increase in revenue.
Well,
And also then looking, sorry, also just looking, Lynn and I were also actually talking this morning about how important the 5-year forecast is going to be on this as well. And again, so that's going to be, again, complicating it somewhat, but really important to look at when we bring these numbers back to you for the April Finance Committee meeting.
And I need to tell you, when my commission does look at an increase and stuff, and we're doing this, they're going to ask me about the wages and the like, and I have to be able to justify them to them, because we actually get into it, because we handle our negotiations very tight within the commission, actually doing a lot of it, just not sitting in the room. But I got to give a very big thank you or shout out to Lynn, because Robin, exactly what you said, Lynn hit me over the head with repeatedly during that conversation, to make sure that after all the stuff that I understood, that it has to be considered in that manner, and that even though she likes certain things or would like to see this, there's a reality that we had to deal with. And I wanted you guys to know, in our conversation with me, Lynn made sure I understood that very clear. So
Otherwise, everything we're talking about is academic.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Got to implement it. Hey, Shannon, yeah, I see you, Jim, but could you put the slide kind of the decision points back up again, just so we can look at it as we're talking, and go ahead, Jim.
So Lynn and Jeff, have you had a chance to just ballpark the recommendation, which I think is like the full cost even with the 4% is like 132 or 133,000. How does that impact the fees? Like, to me, I need to know that before I can finalize a recommendation, but otherwise I feel good. And then a sort of a second piece of that is what I think I hear Randy suggesting is doing the like roughly 33,000 now. If you say you started that April 1, that would be a quarter or 3 months worth of that money. And is that something that's reasonable within the current budget matrix with a little bit with a little augmentation or without?
Yes, so I'm not sure. I mean, we haven't looked specific. I mean, have had some initial conversations. I mean, but frankly, I'm not exactly sure what this is going to look like in terms of fee increases. We have had some conversations that last year we did a 5.2% increase for all of our fees and for our assessments, was across the board. But I think this year we'll want to take a more surgical approach. There's some fees that I think are probably below. I mean, similar to doing a market study for our compensation, we're looking at fees and other local air agencies. And for instance, I know our land clearing fees are pretty low, but again, that's a drop in the bucket. It's not like we get much of our revenue from land clearing, burning permits. But I think we will need to take a more surgical look at this. So Jim, I don't know, Lynn, please jump in. I don't know if you have any information to help answer Jim's question.
All good information, good questions. Thank you all for your support. What I would like to propose is that I share my screen, and what my screen is, Dana, hopefully you can hear me, is the 5-year budget forecast that we provided to the board last year. I'd like to share that with you. Okay. Because it might help answer Jim Cooper's question, and also maybe answer some of the questions y'all might have right now that could be somewhat answered by looking at my screen.
Sounds good. We can hear you very clearly this week. Man, you're kind of pushing my tweeters a little bit on my computer, but it's good to be able to hear you.
Okay, I'll bring it down some. So let's see.
I have to take 1 minute. I apologize, but the emergency management just tried to get a hold of me, and that's my job. So go ahead and go forward. I'm going to try and watch while I'm talking, but my apologies. I have to just go pause a minute.
Okay, so share. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this is what the board received last fiscal year during our budget approval process. And obviously it was presented along with the fiscal year 2023 budget that the board actually did pass. And so what you're seeing here are these are the revenues that we expect during our current fiscal year. I have final numbers through February, and if I was to tell you where I think we're going to be at the end of our fiscal year, we're going to be very close to what we expect to receive. We anticipated a little over $3 million. And basically, in a nutshell, with 4 months, March, April, May, and June, projected with revenue expenditures, we might be using about 65,000 of our reserves. And here we had budgeted, let's see, make sure I'm in the right year. We had budgeted about 300,000. Actually, it was 274,000. This was done before the final budget. So that's good news there. But what this also shows you, you can see the progression of some of these revenues that are obviously increasing. Specifically, that's I think most important is looking at where the fees are. Where are they going to go up? I anticipated about a 2% increase per year over a 5-year period. That's not going to happen. It's likely going to have to be much higher than that. It could be 4 to 7%. I need to plug in my numbers below, which is our expenditures. And obviously our salaries and benefits, that represents about 83% of a budget for our ORCAA's budget. There's some future projects that ORCAA would like to undertake, whether it be our strategic planning, changing out our conference room, doing some serious upgrades to our building. We have a long wish list. How much of that do we want to include in our next fiscal year budget and the future? So I guess what I'm sharing with you, we want to balance the budget, but how much of the reserve we're going to be using, and how much is the board willing to increase fees to balance, and how much of a minimum reserve does the board want to maintain as emergency reserve for the building, for emergency operations, catastrophic, for our database, which is going to be a very expensive purchase over the next 1 to 3 years. You're looking 250, 300,000. So to answer your question and to try to put some things in perspective, we have to seriously ask you, board, what are you willing to move forward with too in terms of increasing fees?
So it sounds to me that like we need to give really Lynn a couple
Oh,
scenarios to plug into this 5-year forecast. Is that appropriate?
yes, sir.
And
Yeah, and then we can come back to you in April with, okay,
Draft
given this
one.
scenario, then what does that mean for fees, and what does that mean for the 5-year projection? So what are the different options for paying for these different implementation options or option?
Mhm.
Thank you. Very clarifying. Robin?
Has the board had typical practice when it comes to having a reserve fund? Like, have we anchored it at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months of organizational expenses, or has it kind of gone up and down?
A good question, Robin. The board passed a resolution a number of years ago to establish an emergency reserve, and it's 20% of expenditures less our major Title V program, which has its own reserve. So we've hovered around $360,000, $390,000 per year for an emergency reserve, 3 months equivalent. We maintain that until the board by resolution changes that. We also have, let me share tab number 2. Sorry, is it too tiny for you? Let me try to. Here, if you recall, this is our fund balance. This shows you where those contingencies are that I just described.
Mhm.
We're
Is this
in,
with the same 2% per year that was tied to the other budget?
yes, sir.
Okay.
So we estimated 371,000 in our current fiscal year emergency reserve. We increased that based on obviously expenditures. So this is tied into the 5-year revenue expenditure sheet we just saw. We also have in here the contingency and capital funds for our other needs, office building, monitoring, the database, and vacation sick leave. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks. Randy, were you able to listen as you were at the step away?
A little bit, yeah. I apologize again, but I've handled what we had to go. I'd like to give input on what I would love to see actually put together in the formula. The formula that I would love to see. First of all, I want to make clear that I think we need to drop the moving everybody to the next step. The steps are there for that purpose already. That's what they do, is they go through the process, they move into the step. We're not at a point to where they're below enough where we need to do something like that. So I'd like to remove that extra thing. It doesn't make sense. There's no purpose except for to give a raise all the way across, other than the raise we already give people. And so I think that's inappropriate. I'd like to see that drop. But I'd like to see the numbers with the removal of 21, range 21. I'd like to see the numbers. I still don't know, when we discussed on the meeting, there was one position that was well over or well under, and we had the other two positions that were below that were well under, that would be increased immediately already by dropping 21. I don't know what the other two are. I'd like to hear what those other two are, and are they greater than 5% below the average? But with that, it's actually simple. I'd like to see the calculation, including what it would look like for removing that one phase, for adding these individuals and decide how much percentage each one of those should get. And then to add, let's just say a 2.25% increase for the next year's budget. That's for everybody across the board, though.
Thank you, Randy. Can we answer Randy's questions and then go to you, Jim? I don't know, Shannon, I can't see, but maybe Robin, you can, or Lynn, you can stop.
Stop sharing, sorry.
And can we address Randy's question about who are the other two staff that wouldn't be addressed by drop in step 21?
Yeah, you bet. Just a moment. So I've got to find the right page. I think it's this one. Okay, so these are the 5 jobs that we're talking about, that are specific to the market, saying like they could be paid more competitively. The range for these jobs should be more competitive. So these are the 5 jobs that we're talking about. The 3 that are under step A, that's people. So we've got a little bit of overlap. So and Kathy can chime in here. Go ahead, Kathy.
So the 3 people that are below, there's 2 from this list, and then there's one other that's from moving the eliminating grade 21. So that's the 3 people. 2 of them have jobs on this list, and one is below because we're moving their grade.
Okay, let me ask this way. The air quality specialists 1 and 2, those are the ones that would change by removal of 21?
No.
Which ones change?
Admin assistant and records clerk are the 2 jobs that we moved from 21 to 22.
So those aren't even part of the 5.
Right, because that's not a market driven change. That's more of a, and we can debate the whole living wage concept, as discussed earlier. But that was more about, that just didn't feel right to have those jobs be in that range. We wanted to move those up.
Okay, it didn't feel right. I don't go with it doesn't feel right stuff. So the air quality specialists and stuff like that, you said it's the person. Now, is it the person with their step or the position? Because if a position has many steps.
So when we look at this list here, this is comparing the midpoint of the range, the current range, to the market data for the job. And what we, so at the 50th percentile of the market. And so what we found is that these 5 jobs are low compared to that market 50th percentile. So comparing the middle of the range to the market 50th percentile.
Are all of them below, are 5% or more below?
Yes. Yes.
And then I
In
guess,
some instances, a lot.
Significantly below.
okay, then I think that we need to see that and have that incorporated into whatever is brought forward. Keep it separate, of course, because the board may not want to put implementation immediately. They may want to have it built into a budget. But I'd like to see it separate so I can see what the exact numbers and the cost would be for that, but for each position. Because another question I'd have from management is, of these ones, which ones are hard to fill?
So Randy's, you're modifying kind of your recommendation to incorporate some of that 50th percentile, at least data. Is that right?
Yeah, so like I said, I don't have issue with the 50th percentile. I just think that we have an inflated 50th percentile, but honestly, at my county, I won't put it in the policy, but I do try to do that all the time.
Mhm.
That's, I think that's a good place to be. But that's my personal belief, I don't make all my decisions based on that.
Okay, and I'll just say we have 8 minutes left till everyone's going to join us, so we got to give some direction here pretty quick. So
So
let's just give everyone an opportunity. I know Jim has been waiting, but Randy, can you concisely?
Yep, remove range 21, bring forward what it would look like with these particular increases included, but also separate it out so we can view them and make decisions on them, and a 2.25% raise for next year's budget in the plan, across the board rates.
Okay.
Both.
Lynn, is that easy to, or I guess everyone, is that understandable? Okay, Jim.
Yeah, and I lean away from doing immediacy because of where we are in the timeline, but if we feel like immediacy is that important, I think we could backdate it or do a bonus structure in the new budget.
Retro.
So for me, it's similar scenario to Randy. I do want to do the next step adjustment because I think it's not appropriate if you're then in the middle between ranges, your next step is not really a full step. And so the minus the 21 plus the next step adjustment, to me, those are bundled together. But I think because of Randy's opinion, we should separate them out and see them that way. I also think that Lynn told us that the CPI that we have to base our fees and our budget was around 6%. And so I would like to see the salary adjustment portion at 2%, 4%, and 6%, just so we can see the implications, though I'm pretty sure I'll lean towards a 4 and not just because of the impact on fees. I mean, to be totally honest, I want this agency at 75th percentile because that's where we keep the best employees, but we can't afford it. And because of the impact it would have on our customers.
Okay, so adding the basically 4 and 6 onto the 2.25.
To Randy's, yep.
Okay, so additional data. Robin,
This is also adding the next step. I was not adding the next step. They are in the process of getting step.
Yes, so
That
understanding.
was like $3,000. So,
And we're talking about seeing all these permutations pushed into the 5-year forecast, right?
or just an annual budget. I mean, I don't know that she needs to go all the way to 5-year until we pick a scenario.
Okay. Robin, any other things you'd like to see?
No, I mean, I think that we all know this, but what Lynn is going to have to do is if we assign a 2% or a 4% or a 6% to all of the steps and all of the ranges, it has a bow wave effect that's going to continue to impact the budget, not just now, but because people are going to progress through the steps, as Randy said. So if folks are at the bottom of the range, they're going to continue to get paid more as they move upward in the steps. So it has sort of this radiating future impact to the budget and potentially to fees and what we do about our reserve. So it makes sense to me that we would shift those 5 up, eliminate step 21 or range 21, and then look at a 2, a 4, and a 6, just to understand what the cost of those permutations is.
Okay. Great. I don't have anything to add. Lynn, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. The CPI was 6.3%, just an FYI for y'all, for the period ending December 2022. What I hear y'all saying for options, remove range 21, bring the 5 positions to the next step, provide with the cost of across the board increase in salaries using 2.25, 4, and 6%. The 5-year future forecast, what I'll use is the middle of the road. I'll be using 4%. That way we have something to look at Because it's easy to look at middle of the road and go up to or down to, because that's what the other options will include. Are you comfortable with that? Did I hear you all? Did I? Is that?
Yep, and I think sometimes, separating the next step out too, so we can understand impact both with or without each of these decisions.
Three components. Yeah, totally. Good.
Separate out next step.
And Kathy and I can work with Lynn on all that side of things. So we're get you on the same page with that.
Great.
Great. And then my report back from the finance committee will just be that we, look through the market study. We've given a couple permutations of suggestions, and we'll bring them to the board in April. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think so. And let's figure out, I mean, again, how much detail do we want to explain to the board about this market study? Do we want to ask Shannon and Kathy to give this presentation at the April board meeting, or is it something that maybe the finance committee or Lynn and I want to walk folks through? So we don't need to make that decision now, but I'd like some input from board members on what you think is going to be appropriate for the full board at the April meeting.
I mean, let's just talk about it quickly. I think having a brief 10-minute presentation from Shannon and Kathy would only inform the data.
Okay.
Agreed.
Mhm.
Okay.
So that's on April 12th.
Otherwise, we just made it all up.
Yeah.
Be a little bit cautious. If you start talking about all this stuff in the public session, which is all public, I know, but I'm just saying with employees and stuff, there starts to become expectations that you're setting up. And you're throwing in conversations where you're talking about increases as high as 6%, and they end up getting 2 or 4. There's going to be issues that come with that. So please keep all that in mind. And I want to remind you, you're talking about 6% are trying to get to 70% of the very highest comparable that there is around. Matter of fact, it's so high, Thurston County, that we don't use it as one of our comparables through the state. It is not considered one of our 5 comparables. So if you get to the 75th percentile of the highest thing around all of us, you're gonna have a mutiny.
I hear you, Randy. We gotta wrap it up, but I won't mention
Have a
any
good-
numbers today, and we'll talk about how we couch it at the finance meeting before we bring it into the public meeting. Good.
But I think Randy's right. Separating the personnel recommendation from the budget recommendation in April, so that it's about that, and then the budget comes next.
Copy that.
Yeah.
All right, everyone has 30 seconds to do with what you will.
Woohoo!
And the finance personnel meeting is adjourned.
Gonna go get a cup of coffee.